What's up guys, Akariss here, bringing you yet another Fire Emblem Heroes video. Well, here we are, with the upcoming Gaius Resplendent. So, we don't have him yet in the game, but those of you that might be excited, or at least want to know how he fits in the current 2020 metagame, that's what the goal of this video is hopefully going to accomplish. So we're going to do what we usually do, we're going to treat this as a unit analysis video, but if you have access to the Resplendent, well, consider that as a little bit of a bonus. Thankfully, compared to tanks, Gaius won't really care too much about a lot of the Resplendent stats. He does benefit from the attack and speed, but generally speaking, the defense and res is pretty insignificant, so this, of course, as a unit analysis, should do, and hope to get you guys thinking at least about where Gaius stands, and is he really comparable to some of the other more recent daggers and their refines as well. So yeah. Alright, let's begin this video as I usually do and just mention our sponsors, which is literally you guys. So I've been doing this for a long time now as a content creator, and thankfully due to many of the generous folks watching this video and in my community in general choose to support what I do. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but make sure if you are considering it at least to see me going for years to come in this game that we all love, Patreon is a great option for that. By doing so, you get access to a couple of really cool things, such as a weekly podcast focused on AR defense or Summoner Duels, and or, depending on the week, stuff like Medeus was talked about recently, my thoughts, and others shared it as well. It's a great way to interact. You also get to be featured in a monthly unit review video, which is coming up soon, and some other behind-the-scenes private sort of stuff, such as the Discord, and access to almost immediate questions no matter what you ask, and regardless of how good you are at the game. Another thing that's even more personal, if you wanted to support what I do, is hands-on coaching. For those who don't know, I am a real teacher. That's my day job, so a lot of what I learned from those skills apply to my coaching, and that's why I try to encourage this, because you really will get a tutoring one-on-one type experience. If you love this game as much as I do, that's a great way to do it and go from whatever mode or whatever characters you want to use to their maximum potential, and I can help you do that. But yeah, let's actually jump straight back into Gaius and where he stands in today's video and today's meta for heroes. First of all, Gaius is probably forgotten. If I was to give a dagger unit or character mostly forgotten, Gaius would be one of them. Despite him being from Awakening, and I think he actually is at least decently popular. It's based on CYL results, especially the earlier ones. I do think people do like him. I think I vaguely remember using him myself during my Awakening playthrough, as he is one of the few thieves, or tricksters I guess, in that game, depending on where you choose to promote or a class change. Either way, Gaius is somewhat at least relevant, as you'll see throughout this video, and hopefully we are here to describe that. I'll start off this video by looking at the art. So this is a Muspel color scheme or outfit change. His colors are already dark, but based on his older other outfit, he does retain that whole candy appeal, as that's kind of what he's known for here. But beyond that, I have nothing more to say. I guess his candy could potentially melt because of Muspel's fire and whatnot. But yeah, nothing more to say. I think it's an okay Resplendent, and hopefully you guys enjoy it, for those of you that do get the opportunity to do so. But in this video, we are not going to talk about the outfit. We're going to talk about an analysis and how good he potentially might be. So we'll start off just by looking at his stats before we do other things. His stats are leaning towards speed. With the Resplendent, it helps a little bit. He reaches 38 speed and has a 31 attack stat. So his attack is kind of low, but you'll see later that the speed is the more appropriate and more defining stat for Gaius, which is still somewhat competitive, but not exactly extremely relevant. So first thing I want to actually do is give him that direct comparison with other dagger units. And this is the sorted by stats. So if you actually look at the other options here, you'll see he's quite a whiles behind. I mean, he's over 30 stats difference between Yuri and Joshua and himself. That is a huge difference, and if you even factored in the Resplendent stats, it doesn't get much better, folks. He literally just goes up to right below Chad, and he still would be lacking quite a bit of stats in general to be competitive with some of the better ones, such as Yuri, Joshua, and unfortunately, stuff like Cronia and Gangrel are still going to be due for refines that could obviously set them apart or further ahead of somebody like Gaius. So his future outlook isn't too great, but I'd say the more direct comparisons are definitely something like Soth, Legault, or Kaze. And I'm not going to cover Kaze or Soth in this particular video, but they are quite comparative comparison to what Gaius can do, competitive as well. So it is a hard sell for someone like Gaius to be able to use him well. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about the builds as well. So here we have him compared side by side with maximum potential of the other two super speedy F2P type dagger units. And as you can actually see right away, Legault also has access to 20 flowers, being also a fairly older dagger unit, but with that most recent refine, I'd say Legault stands out quite a bit, having stuff like damage reduction in his weapon, actually having the +5 kind of true damage as well, which I would consider to be unique to Gaius, and I'll show you the weapons in a moment. But you also have to consider that Cronia herself is another speedy dagger unit who hasn't got a weapon refine yet and should be due for one probably near the end of this year. With those factors considered, as a speedy dagger archetype, he isn't really competing in stats either, even with a Resplendent and max investment. So he doesn't really define anything here, and his weapon is okay, but I'll talk about that in more detail in a moment. When it comes to like his pros and cons, I'd say he is decent at least because he has true damage in his weapon and can function as a pretty solid nuker, especially when combined into like a Catria ball, which we'll discuss in the builds. Also, being infantry is kind of good as it does give him access to a lot of infantry synergy or skills such as null follow-up, infantry pulse, times pulse, etc, etc. So that's the defining features of him. It's not exclusive to him, but they are benefits, and unfortunately when it comes to consequences, cons, he's just not competing in stats, unfortunately, and he's not Yuri, who's definitely one of the better dagger units. Now, if we did take a look at the weapons themselves to give you even more details as to why Gaius doesn't stand out really, his weapon is one of the older weapon refines. It's not a newer one like Legault, for example, and someone like Cronia is due for a refine soon, which will only unfortunately make Gaius fall behind even further. So his weapon gives him some extra speed and gives him true damage based on his speed, which is pretty good if you consider that he might reach something like 50 some speed, potentially 60. That is an additional 5 to 6 damage off of his hits, all of them, and that's something good to have, especially if you combine him with brave type effects like Bridal Catria, which will really amplify the amount of damage he can do. In his refine effect, he even gets some more true damage. So you can use him with something like an AoE special, and he'll get something like 7 extra damage. That does unfortunately turn off one of his effects on the refine, but he also, the fact that his base effect adds in some extra true damage applies to that AoE type effect. So I do think he's a good candidate for AoEs, but he's also a good candidate for your standard specials like Luna and Lethality, where he's going to rely on those to realistically do most of his damage since his attack stat isn't the highest. Compared to someone like Legault though, Legault does kind of beat him in most of these areas, unfortunately. So Legault gets the benefit of taking advantage of enemy buffs, so a unit doesn't really want to buff into Legault, as Legault just gets that straight up and extra attack. Legault also has speed damage reduction, or just damage reduction in general, which makes Legault a solid tank, or potentially a nuker who can just survive a lot of hits back because of this. He gets extra attack and speed, as you can see through Legault's weapon refine, and on top of that, near the end of that text, you'll see he gets extra damage on his special as well, and that can apply to AoEs. So unfortunately Gaius doesn't have a lot going for him, and Legault does kind of just outclass him in general. But maybe you're more of a Gaius fan, and therefore you can still use him in a lot of the builds I'll showcase in a moment. Finally, just as a last look here, Cronia is not refined yet, but she is unique in the fact that she does already have an attack and 5 speed bonus in her weapon with a fairly easy condition, just kind of having anyone below 100%. Most people who are familiar with Cronia know that Cronia is a Vantage type character. Now, that doesn't exclude her from some other type of builds as well, which I've tried in the past, such as a tank build, and I could see Cronia being pretty solid post-refine, either reviving her Vantage kind of niche, or adding even more into maybe something like a tank, or just really becoming a solid nuker. All of these are out in the open for Chronia in the future, which unfortunately would just make Gaius less relevant. But yeah, let's go back into the builds here that I want to show you if you wanted to use Gaius. Now, without a doubt, I would say that Gaius is great on something like a Catria Ball. He is going to benefit quite a bit from stacking his speed, potentially using an AoE special, or just making him really annoying with an impact, let's say no follow-up, times pulse. Due to his high HP, he's going to be a bit harder to pulse, but you should still be able to accomplish it depending on your other units on the team, such as a Dancer that may easily infantry pulse him, therefore making him quite the lethal threat. And that isn't just a pun because he can potentially use lethality, but generally speaking, that's going to be one of his better builds. So for sure, Bridal Catria teams are one of his best places. Not shown here, you can also use him in AR offense as a type of nuker, breacher type unit, but I do feel someone like Yuri just does that better, or even Soth, who I haven't shown in this video. The fact that he's lacking a slaying weapon is also a detriment, as it's harder to pulse him and use stuff like AoEs or lethality. It's still possible, but unfortunately for him, he's just not really going to be as competitive there. Another really cool benefit that I think Gaius can use is going to be the no follow-up effects found on Lilith and Byleth. So if you do have access to either of them, if you wanted to ally support Lilith or use Byleth in some manner, he's going to use those no follow-up effects really well. So if you're using him, let's say in air offense, as wind sweep, because he's almost always going to meet that wind sweep condition from his immense speed, Lilith's no follow-up will be really good to still activate it, but also provide him with the mobility he needs to get out. So if you were to, let's say, engage, and especially against Kanto control, Yuri would suffer a little bit, but Lilith could come in, let's say on Gaius, and Gaius's incredible speed, and just reposition him out, get a dance off on Lilith after that, or Gaius, and then continue the chain of getting out easier. Compared to, of course, Yuri, who uses foul play, and that might not be as convenient. Either way, no follow-up is great on him, and will find tons of places. That's why I think in terms of partners in offense, Byleth, Lilith, great options. On defense, has a place on Catria teams, though there are obviously alternatives to the nukers that could work just as well, such as Legault, maybe Kaze. Alright folks, that's going to basically cover everything I can give you for Gaius, so if you are a Candy fan, then I can see why you might be excited about Gaius, but realistically, he's not keeping up with today's game, and on his future outlook just doesn't look as awesome either, due to future refines on other dagger units such as Chronia and Gangrel, who are again quite speedy and just have more stats, even with Gaius's Resplendent coming up. But that's it from me. As always, if you wanted to support this channel, check out the Patreon, coaching perhaps, and at the bare minimum, even if you can't do that, a thumbs up is super appreciated, and if you haven't subbed yet, that's all I'll really say for today. Thank you for doing so. Love you all, and see you in the next video very soon. Peace.